everybody. Welcome to another episode of Legal Muscle, starring Rick Collins. Rick is a past president of the Nassau County Bar Association, a founding partner in the firm Collins, Gann, McCloskey, and Barry, author of the best-selling book, Legal Muscle, and just a heck of a great guy. He's jacked. I love this guy. Please welcome Rick Collins.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
So this is a very momentous occasion. We're speaking because this is the 20th anniversary of your column in Muscular Development, the Busted Legal Muscle column. You've been doing this for 2 full decades now.
Insane.
Wow, it is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Where'd the time go, man?
I wish I knew. So, we want to go over, we're going to do this in 2 parts because you've had so many great columns. We're going to go over some of them today from the first 10 years, but I'd like to start by finding out the story. How did you end up writing for Muscular Development? How does an attorney end up writing for a bodybuilding magazine?
Yeah, right. So, well, first, thanks for setting these up. I think this is technically my third Legal Muscle podcast with MD. So thank you for inspiring me to do this, and that's kind of, that ties into it because when I started writing for MD was pre 9/11. So it was just before 9/11. It was before Facebook existed. It was before social media. It was before the internet was really such a primary source of information about bodybuilding and about both at the competitive level and just information on nutrition and stuff. And so I was brought in early on in I think the summer of 2001. I had already been doing a lot of work involving bodybuilding and legal work, so representing bodybuilders who've gotten in trouble for different things or who needed help on different types of contractual issues or litigation issues. And so I had already been doing a lot of that. And Steve Blackman and I had dinner one night, and just before coming on board, and he gave me the column, which we called Busted, to do pretty much whatever I wanted to do, where kind of certainly law, but also social and political and cultural things intersected with bodybuilding, nutrition, training, freedom. And so for the last 20 years, Ron, I've been writing, with you and all the other great folks at Team MD. Shout out to Alan Golnick and Alan Dietrich, all the people who have been with me on this ride for these last 20 years, and all the fans of the column since it started. I would imagine that some of the fans who were reading the print magazine in 2001, I don't know if they're still viewers now, guys and women who are maybe in their 20s or 30s then, or they may not be as committed, right, to training. So there is a new generation, and I think this podcast reaches a whole bunch of people who may not be familiar with my columns that I wrote back, so many years ago. So I'm grateful for being able to do this podcast on a somewhat regular basis with you. And so what I thought, you and I talked about it, and what we kind of came up with was sort of doing at this 20-year anniversary of the Busted column, covering, at least in this podcast, kind of 10 columns of the 120 or so that I did in those first 10 years, which I think have relevance now, and are still things that it may be new information for some people. And then maybe we'll do another sit down at some point in the not too distant future and cover, from 2011 to 2021. So if that makes sense, I'd love to give you some thoughts on some of my columns.
Let's dive right in, Rick. So in the November 2001 issue, I don't know if that was your first column. It was definitely one of the first columns that you ever did. Traffic stops / justice prevails. What was that one about?
So yeah, that was one of the first columns. I think my first column might have been the month before, but it was what I sometimes do in the columns, as you know, is I'll write about cases that I'm handling, which I think are instructive for people to know about. So back at that time, I had gotten a case. It was in Mississippi, and the client had called me to say that he'd been arrested on an interstate heading back from what would have been Mexico, heading back to New York, which is where he owned a gym. And he was stopped on the interstate by a Mississippi trooper. And the trooper stopped his car, comes over to the driver's side window and says, "Well, now, what are you doing down here, boy? You got New York plates on your car." And told him that the reason he had stopped him was that he was some sort of improper driving within a lane, that he was staying in the left lane too long, some fairly nonsensical reason for the stop.
Okay.
So the guy says, "Well, I'm heading back to New York. I was visiting some friends, and I'm heading on my way." And the trooper said, "Well, now, you don't mind if I take a look in your trunk now, do you?" And he's like, "Well, actually, I do mind. I've done nothing wrong, but I'm not consenting to a search of my trunk." Okay, reasonable, enforcing his protections, constitutional protections.
Yep.
Trooper says, "Well, now then we got a problem, because if you don't let me look in your trunk, I'm going to have to call the K9 unit. And the K9 unit's going to come and it's going to sniff around, and that could be a big, big problem if there's something in that trunk that you're not telling me about." The client says, "No, that's I have nothing in the trunk to declare, and I'd like to be on my way if that's okay." And the trooper said, "Well, that's not going to happen. Could take a long, long, long time for the K9 unit to get here. You sure you don't want to change your mind?" The guy's like, "I'm not changing my mind." So lo and behold, the K9 unit is called, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, they're waiting there. Trooper comes back to the car and he says, "Well, now, I'm going to give you a warning now. When that dog gets here, he's a mean, nasty dog. And he goes wild. If he smells something in that trunk, he's going to go wild. I've seen him scratch. I've seen him rip the paint off cars. I've seen him get loose. Sometimes he goes after the driver. I can't make any promise." "Are you sure? He's a wild animal. Wild animal. You sure you don't want to do something and let me look in that trunk?" Again, the client stands his ground and says, "Absolutely not." So the K9 unit finally arrives, and the dog very ceremoniously gets out of the vehicle and is walked around the car, not once, but twice, circles the vehicle, and then just quietly sits down. He sees the trooper whispering with the K9 unit personnel.
Handlers,
And he thinks he hears the words, "We ain't got shit." Trooper walks over. He says, "Well, now we got a problem. It's a hit." He goes, "It's a hit." No, that's not what he said. He said, "You ain't got shit." No, he said, "It's a hit. Open the trunk." And so the trunk was opened, and lo and behold, there was a cornucopia of various anabolic drugs, anabolic steroids, some testosterone, some nandrolone, some Winstrol, various different things in the trunk of the car. So, and arrest about 700 cc's. So at some point, the client is arrested. The case proceeds. I wind up getting local counsel for the case, the best local counsel I could secure for him in that area. And ultimately, they refused to dismiss the case. They refused to provide any kind of reasonable decision on it, and any sort of reasonable resolution. And so that first column that I wrote was about that process, and about how in car stops, you do have the right to refuse to allow a search of your trunk, and that the police require probable cause in most states for them to do that. And that asking, "Am I free to leave? I'd prefer to leave," is what a reasonable person would do if, in fact, particularly if they had something that they didn't want discovered in the trunk. And so it was basically a column about Fourth Amendment issues, followed up by a later column. And it was, I guess, it might have been a year or two late, or a few years later, actually. I think it was actually 2006 that I followed up with a column about Justice Prevails. And that column kind of rehashed a little bit of what happened at the scene, but then also discussed the fact that this case ultimately went to trial. And at that trial, the client was actually convicted by a Mississippi jury, and the judge sentenced the client.
Oh, God.
You ready for this? He was a family man with a clean record, but this is not a federal court. This is a state court. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison.
My God.
Yep, on the top count, 18 of them suspended, but that still leaves a 6-year sentence, which is a whopping sentence for a steroid case. So luckily, the client remained at liberty while the appeal was pending. And ultimately, the State Court of Appeals found that the driving did not violate any law, that it was an improper stop from the beginning, and that the judge basically should have thrown the case out before it ever went that far. And it added, and here's a quote from the Court of Appeals decision, was that even if the stop was proper, the trooper lacked good cause to detain the client to wait for the arrival of the canine unit because, quote, having a large frame and owning a gym do not necessarily indicate that the person is on steroids, much less that the person is trafficking steroids. And that was the decision of the court. The client's now a free man. The only other thing I'd point out is, and I did a lot of research on this, to try to figure out whether a canine unit could actually detect an anabolic steroid in the trunk of a car. And I spoke to multiple canine handlers from across America, and some of them said it's not possible. Some of them said it's theoretically possible. All of them said that, to their knowledge, nobody had ever trained a dog on that.
Right.
And so I'm not so sure how valid.
They can't smell the oil inside a bottle. Come on.
So,
okay, that was an
so
excellent.
That was the first. That was the first of the ones that I picked out, and it was sort of a double column on that.
Yeah, and what a great accent you did for the trooper there too, by the way.
I know that was my best. That's my all-purpose Southern accent. I'm sorry if it offended any of my friends and fans down south.
So the next one that you selected was April 2002 column, talking about a very, very controversial law. I guess, I don't know if it's a law, or the Anabolic Steroid Control Act, the wrong prescription, ? Was the title.
Yes. So that was a column that was actually adapted from an article that I had published in the New York State Bar Association Journal, and in adapted for a few other legal periodicals. And it was really an evaluation of how it is that steroids became controlled substances in the first place, right? And whether that categorization is really working or not. And the column really hashed out the process by which Congress in the late 1980s started to think about what to do about the sports cheating issue that was coming out. You remember Ben Johnson in 1988 became the fastest man alive at the Seoul Olympics, and then tested positive for Winstrol. And, the world of sports upended itself. And here you had the Canadian sprinter beating Carl Lewis, the American sprinter. And so Congress held a lot of hearings, and they actually called witnesses from the NFL and other sports agencies and anti-doping authorities, and focused primarily on the issues of the unfair playing field that would occur if steroids became prolific in sports. There was a veneer of public safety issues, but that really clearly was not Congress's main problem with steroids. I've sometimes said in interviews that steroids are probably the only drug that became a controlled substance, not for what it does bad to you, but because of what it does well for you. And that is helps you to run faster, or jump higher, or hit a ball further, or hit harder, or any of the other things that increased muscle mass could do in a sport. So, so that was sort of the process. And in 1990, steroids became classified as Schedule III controlled substances, like Vicodin, in the same general set of laws with cocaine and heroin and marijuana. Kind of the only hormone that's in there, kind of the orange and the apple crate of the Controlled Substances Act, but it is what it is. And so most state laws and federal law now make anabolic steroids a controlled substance. And some of the things that I talk about in that column were whether it's really worked well. The purposes of it was to get steroids out of sports. And this was, again, we're thinking 1990. I don't think anybody thinks steroids left sports in 1990, right? We've got Lance Armstrong, we got Falco, we've got, all the Major League Baseball hearings that were held more than a decade later. So I don't think it necessarily did a great job on that. It was to protect public health also. And I'm not sure it did a very good job on that either, because the effect of the law was really to isolate doctors out of the equation and to introduce dealers and, ultimately traffickers, importers, and now more recently underground labs, esterifying and manufacturing raw powders into usable products without any sort of GMP compliance or oversight by FDA and facilities and whatnot. So when we really think about safety, I'm not sure we really did too much on that. We really created a larger and larger black market, right?
100%. Wow. Next one, I don't remember this one, but what a title. January 2005 issue of MD, 10 Commandments. This wasn't biblical, was it? Or was it?
No, I try to catch up. I kind of throw some catchy titles in there sometimes, and you'll see a few other ones that I picked out for us. But
the next one's awesome.
These were the 10 commandments that I said that bodybuilders need to adhere to, particularly if they're going to be enhanced in some way. And the 10 commandments were, first, if you're gonna use supplements, use them responsibly. Be monitored by a knowledgeable physician, get some lab tests, don't be an idiot. The second was, take steps to not encourage, to discourage, to keep under 21-year-olds away from steroids. I think almost everybody that I know, including all of my steroid clients, would say that, teenagers shouldn't be using steroids, and it's not something we should encourage. Third was treat your loved ones with respect, and I gave some thoughts about. I've had some cases where a loved one turns in her boyfriend, her husband, her fiance for various acts of disrespect, and don't be an asshole covers a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
Fourth was, don't talk and brag about what you do, because the world is full of rats and snitches, and nobody needs to open their mouth about that for private matters. Next was, your computer isn't necessarily safe, so recognize that what you put in emails, even if you delete it on your computer, it's on somebody else's computer, the person you sent it to. And if that person ever has some reason to need to throw somebody under the bus, your emails can be provided from that end, and they can come back and haunt you. 6 was just recognizing that your mail isn't necessarily secure. And so particularly international mail can be opened without a warrant. So you have very limited protection in that. 7th, respect the privacy of your own home. Invite people in that you want to come in, that your friends, your neighbors, your family. Don't invite strangers in, particularly if they're law enforcement and they don't have a warrant. You have every right to be able to say, look, I don't consent to a search of my house. If you don't have a warrant, come back with one, or give me your card and I'll have my lawyer, Rick Collins. He's happy to call you anytime and discuss these matters with you. Eighth was recognizing that your trash can say a lot to you. And once you put it out to the street, you no longer have an expectation of privacy in it generally. And the police can do a trash pull and go through it. And if they find anything like, empty vials or labels or anything else that might be problematic, that can provide probable cause to search your house. Ninth was recognizing cars have a lower level of expectation of privacy than other places, particularly anything that's in open view and plain view in your car is subject potentially to seizure. And then last, don't be shy about answering the questions posed to you by law enforcement agents with a simple, you know what, I'd prefer not to answer those questions. Give me your card. I'll have my lawyer contact you. He'll straighten everything out. Don't have to, you're not obligated under the law to answer questions, and you have every right to immediately ask for a lawyer. And once you use that magic word, my attorney, my lawyer, that's got to shut down the questioning by law. So that was my 10 commandments for the hardcore bodybuilding community.
Okay. I love this next title. October 2005 issue, Barbies for Boldenone. Wow. What was that about?
Well, yeah. So back in 2005, there was a flurry of press reports about this burgeoning epidemic, this scary epidemic of purportedly juiced up prepubescent girls who were terrorizing the playgrounds of America, right? The articles were entitled things like "More Girls Try Taking Steroids to Tone Up," and their quotes were like, "An alarming number of American girls, some as young as 9, are using bodybuilding steroids, not to get an edge on the playing field, but to get the look of toned, sculpted models and movie stars."
Wow.
9-year-old girls are taking steroids just to look good. And you know what happens, Ron, is that one scurrilous reporter comes out with an ill-founded, lacking any basis, distorted statement, and suddenly it becomes like a game of telephone, and all the other journalists just jump on it, and suddenly it's got kind of a life of its own. And so this went all around, even to the point where politicians started picking up on this. And every elected official wants an opportunity to save the children, right? So here you got these poor little 9-year-old girls who are washing down handfuls of Anadrol with sips of a juice box, and they need to be saved, Ron. You got to save them.
God.
And then, of course, even anti-doping folks, jumped in and were citing it in speeches in order to justify more funding for anti-doping efforts and whatnot. And so I went through the actual stats and the actual basis, and without going into great detail, the idea that our little fourth graders are trading their Barbies for Boldenone or forking over their milk money to brace-faced little steroid dealers in the lunchroom, no basis for it, just quite absurd. But it's sort of a cautionary tale about how the media can sometimes run with something that really has little or no basis, and suddenly it becomes fact.
Wow. Yeah. There was an SNL skit a few years ago that it was all about this. It was a TV reporter. He was at a schoolyard. He kept saying the new trend, and it was all these scary things, and all the kids are doing it. And then some kids would come over and say, "No, we're not. No, we're not." They were just doing it because it was all completely fabricated.
Yep.
Next column, March 2006, culture of fear. That sort of ties into what we were just talking about.
So I was kind of riffing on that whole concept, and this whole idea that the media, special interest groups, elected officials, there is a profit to fear. There is a great amount of money to be made by keeping the public in one state of terror after another ad infinitum. And so I took that, this is actually a quote from my column. And again, this was 2006. It's about culture of fear is about the rise of fear that dominates our public life in America and creates an atmosphere where problems like crime, child abductions, aircraft crashes, natural disasters, infectious disease outbreaks, and school violence seem out of control, and danger seems to lurk all around us. And so I covered in this column a few books, one by a sociology professor named Frank Ferretti, who wrote a book called Culture of Fear, Risk-Taking and Morality of Low Expectations. Another book is Creating Fear, News and the Construction of Crisis. You know, anybody who's interested in sort of the way the media shapes our perception of risk in ways that magnify certain risks while ignoring potentially greater risks in other ways. They can certainly just Google some of these culture of fear type books. Really talks about media scaremongering early on. Another quote from the column was, "A national crisis is a golden opportunity for holding televised hearings and talking tough on camera. If children appear to be endangered, even better for scoring points with the voters and earning fat campaign contributions for the next election." So that was, you know, more than 15 years ago. You know, I'm not sure really that much has changed, my friend.
No, fear sells, 100%. Yeah. Something in your kitchen could kill you. Story at 11. Yeah. So, next column, I don't know, was this just about you? June 2006, steroid lawyer.
Yeah, so I did a column, you know, and it was inspired because back when I went to law school, I was probably the only bodybuilder in my law school class, and I had just been competing, and so I came off of the competition cycle and started, you know, law school, and I think back then there was a more negative view, almost the stronger stereotypical thinking about what bodybuilders. I think almost everybody thought I was going to fail out of law school within a month and, you know, be on the street with, you know, drinking out of a protein carton in an alley somewhere.
Yeah.
At least some did. But the irony, of course, was I was actually there on a full academic scholarship, and I was on law review after my first year, and so I did well academically. But I didn't. I actually sort of doubled down on the meatheads, so I actually would wear like the, you know, cut off hoodies and all sorts of stuff just to kind of mess with some folks. But so as the years passed, more and more college kids went to law school who were bodybuilders and were into fitness, and fitness became more mainstream, certainly as the years went on. And so I started very often getting letters or emails or phone calls from young law students and sometimes young lawyers saying, you know, I'm a bodybuilder, I'm into fitness, I've been competing, or I'm a recreational gym rat, and I love what you do. You know, you've created this kind of a law practice where bodybuilding meets the law. And the name, the steroid lawyer, you know, it was some kind of a marketing tool that somebody used at some point. But obviously, you know, my practice is much broader than that, although it centers around bodybuilding and it centers around, you know, fitness and nutrition, certainly. And so that column was really sort of my thinking of what to tell the next generation of law students about building a practice that you love what you do every day. And I do. I'm so blessed. And not every lawyer can say this. There are lawyers who don't like what they do. There are types of law that I don't think I would like to do. I love what I do. I love my practice. I'm able to help people with to paraphrase Liam Neeson in Taken. I've got a very particular set of skills, right? And they're skills that make me, you know, very helpful to certain people. And it's a fairly broad class of people, and my clients are generally decent, good folks, whether they're involved in some sort of performance enhancing debacle, or if they're in the nutrition or supplement industry. They're generally good people. And so I talk just about, you know, kind of what it means to what the elements of being a good lawyer are. And certainly it's having a head for what you do. It's having a heart for your own clients. It's having some chutzpah, a Yiddish term. And, you know, when you're a lawyer, you know, even though I'm half Italian and half Irish, you learn. And that's just like, look, especially if you're a litigator, if you're a trial lawyer, you're a modern day gladiator. You're going in, you're going up against an adversary who is committed in many instances, certainly in the courtroom, to you losing and them winning. And so you need to be able to step up. And if it's against the government, whether it's a state agency or whether it's the federal government, their resources, their power, their authority exceeds yours. And in some ways, their influence, even with the court, may exceed yours. And so you really have to be creative and fearless in defending your clients. And I love that. Maybe I was a Viking or a bodybuilder or a gladiator in another life and a bodybuilder in this one. But yeah, so I enjoy that. And if those are the things you enjoy, then you've got the criteria for loving what you do as a trial lawyer.
Right on. Next one. This sounds like a political statement here. It was October 2008. You said flex voting muscle, and then in parentheses, dump the incumbents.
Yeah, so this is something that comes up every few years. It was relevant then, it's relevant now, right? And the idea of it was that there were a couple of guys, Michael Boyd and Paul Frey, who were business consultants from Maryland and wrote a book called Dump the Incumbents. And the concept of it was that the longer you stay in office, the less effective you become for the voters, because you establish relationships based on campaign contributions and the special interest influences that affect you. And so that ultimately, there have been people who've been in Congress for decades. I think the one of the records, I think if I remember, was something like 55 years.
Wow.
So, I'm not sure that was ever what was intended for public service, to make it into a lifetime, position. And unfortunately, research shows that people tend to pull the lever when they get in the voting box of the name they recognize. So you have a huge advantage if you're the incumbent. If you're the person who is in the position, you have an advantage over the person who's trying to, get into the position. And so what the premise of that book was to basically, throw a monkey wrench into the system so that when the election day comes, look at who the person is who's in office, regardless of political party, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter, and pull the other lever. Pull the other lever and take the person who has been in that position campaigning year after year and suddenly put them in a position of actually having to find a private sector job and let the new person come in. And their idea was, if that were to happen repeatedly, you would not have these lifelong positions and you'd get fresh blood in. I've also, not in this column, but I've written also about a book called Republic Lost by a guy named Lawrence Lessig, which I think combined with the dump the incumbents, and it would be a good strategy. And he really looks at how campaign finance in this country has to be changed. We have to find a way of getting the money out of politics. The money in politics has really affected virtually every political and social issue. It's helped to divide us as a country in profound ways. And if we could somehow reform the way that political campaigns are financed, we could ultimately, I think, regain some sanity to our national election process.
Now, you know how you get people to pull a lever for you in Massachusetts? That's where I live. You just have the last name Kennedy, and they'll vote for you. It's true.
Oh, there you go. Name recognition is everything.
I don't remember this column. You got to refresh my memory. March 2009, pregnant man is juiced.
Yeah, so that got attention back then, right?
What the heck?
Yeah, so there were headlines back in that year. It was a huge news blitz with the world's first pregnant man.
What?
And you would have thought it was that movie Junior, but it was
Right.
this actually. And he appeared on Oprah. and numerous other talk shows. And, the headlines were making it out to be on par with the discovery of the atom or a lunar landing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a pregnant man, and People magazine actually ran a cover of this person named Thomas Beatty, shirtless, but with a huge belly bump.
I remember now. Yeah.
You remember? It was huge.
Wow.
So Beatty was actually a former Miss Teen Hawaii USA finalist,
Okay.
who had been a woman named Tracy, and then underwent a double mastectomy and took lots of male hormone, but refused any genital surgery. So the ovaries and female body parts remained intact. So the potential for pregnancy continued, even though she was now a he. And so he was in Oregon, legally declared a man by the state of Oregon. And so the testosterone was really for the purpose of appearing, more mass, more hair, stronger jawline, heavier beard, more musculature, more body hair, all of those things to appear more manly, and yet decided to have a child, despite being a man. And so that was the idea of it. And the column really looked at whether there was an inconsistency in, and certainly in no way commenting on in any negative light, the trans process for people, but looking at it more in terms of, so, that is, testosterone is perfectly acceptable in that context, even though the female genitalia remain, but sort of the upper body masculinization. But yet, if a doctor were to try to do that for a man who wanted to be more muscular or leaner or appear, well, that doctor would be arrested if he did it. And so there's some inconsistency, and I'm not saying the two things are exactly the same, but ultimately, are they sufficiently different to justify this wild disparity in treatment, where one we're 100%, we're celebrating that, and putting it on the covers of magazines, and then in the other, people are getting arrested. The man patient who chose to do that would also be committing a crime. Is that disparity too great? And I've written some subsequent articles about that as well. And it's something that I think we've never really thought about or addressed. And certainly until that day, I don't think anybody had really put it in those terms. I'd more often analogized steroid use to cosmetic surgery issues and made that sort of comparison. And that is, as a surgeon, you can certainly implant, prostheses in a patient's biceps and deltoids and pecs, and put all of these, apparati into the person's body. And that's subjecting them to the risk of anesthesia, death, and infection, and all of those other things. But if you attempted to even give a moderate dose of an anabolic steroid for that purpose, the doctor would be a felon under the law, and the patient would be potentially conspiring for his felony. Interesting disparity there of the extent of the difference.
It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Botched, the plastic surgery show.
Yeah.
There's
it's every bad thing that can happen to you.
There was I bring it up because there's a young man, probably in his 30s. To me, that's young. He had put silicone implants to simulate muscles all over his body. I mean, he had created them. He had cut them out of silicone, but he had biceps, delts, pecs, lats, quads, calves, and they were all silicone implants. He had created an entire muscular physique out of implants. It was crazy. Yeah. So I thought your column names couldn't get any more clever or interesting, but this one, April 2009, penis time. What the heck was going on with penis time?
Yeah, I'd been waiting, a few years until I felt comfortable enough to use that title, and when it finally was penis time. And so I think my first line of that column was answering a question from a reader. Thanks for giving me a reason to insert a penis into the magazine column time. So yes, it was about a prosthetic penis, which got a lot of news that year because the device called the Whizzinator. I don't know if you remember it.
Oh, yeah,
it's called the
yeah.
Whizzinator. And it made the headlines because former Vikings running back Ontario Smith was caught with one of these prosthetic penises at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport in 2005. You can only imagine the embarrassment when the TSA inspector says, "Sir, is that your penis?" Right? So the plastic. This was a plastic device. It came in 5 different colors,
Yep.
which would match, depending on the skin tones for various ethnicities.
Yeah.
And it came with a heating element and a bag that emitted either synthetic urine or reconstituted urine from freeze-dried crystals. So the idea was you'd put it in place with a athletic supporter, and even if somebody were watching you urinate in the context of a doping test, whether in an employment situation or probation, supervision situation, or of course athletic competition situation, it would appear as if you were urinating into the sample cup when it was really coming from your Whizzinator. So so ultimately there was a criminal matter against the manufacturers of the product, accusing them of conspiring to sell drug paraphernalia.
Wow.
And so it became a criminal case, and the case was not even so much based on the athletic aspects, the athletic cheating aspect, but more on a lot of their marketing was specifically targeted to people who were either in an employment situation. So for example, there were, according to the court documents, there were testimonials from satisfied customers, including this one. Quote, "I thought I had no chance of landing a new job because I smoke so much. When I saw the Whizzinator, it was like a dream come true." And another one, "I have to pass the U.S. Department of Transportation drug screens every quarter, and your product saved my job countless times."
Boy.
So, I'm not sure we necessarily want train engineers or truck drivers or pilots, for example, being able to pass drug tests with the Whizzinator. And so that was the reason that those folks were prosecuted. And so, that was penis time, my friend.
But that's interesting because I know they do sell products to help people, I don't know, pills, some drink, something that people, they do take to pass, drug screening for employment and I don't see those companies being, I don't see the feds coming after them or anything, but this is we're talking.
This probably was a step beyond that because you're actually supplying the fake urine. You're actually, this is a pretty pure sense of fraud, right? You're actually completely circumventing the test itself, not just trying to, drink lots of water, or something like that.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about that is I know people used to get clean urine from like their wife or girlfriend, and at least in one case, the screeners came back and said, "Good news is your test came back negative for drugs, but you're pregnant, sir." So
yes.
This final column, April 2011. I remember this very well. I can't believe this is 10 years ago. This was the whole Tony Freeman story from Sweden that I recall. Muscle profiling by Swedish police. Oof, that was a debacle.
That was, and I followed up with some other columns because there was a point where some of those Scandinavian countries had adopted some very, very tough positions on steroid use, and muscle profiling was a policy that was used by some police departments in Scandinavia and certainly in Sweden, where if you appeared to be hypermuscular, then that became almost like probable cause to believe that you were under the influence of performance enhancing drugs. And to the analogy that if you're driving your car and the police stop you and you get out of the car and your eyes are bloodshot and you're staggering and you can't stand straight, you can't walk the line. Ultimately, you can look at the person and see that, yes, this person appears to be under the influence because of certain things about the way they appear. And so they extrapolated that and said, basically, if you appear gigantic and, if you're 250 pounds and 6% body fat, you have to be under the influence of steroids, not really understanding that doesn't, obviously, if you're appearing high, you've just consumed it, and there's a psychoactive effect that might affect your driving. If you're, obviously, if you're under the influence of alcohol, that's affecting your driving. Appearing huge doesn't mean you use steroids that day or that week or even that month, or certainly doesn't mean you use them or possess them in the country of Sweden, right? So certainly some problems with that. And there was a celebrated case that reached a lot of media sources where there was a kid in Sweden who was walking down the street and a female police officer approached him. I think she might have been undercover or something. And at first he thought she was attractive and he thought things were going in a good direction. The next thing you know, they went in a bad direction. She took him to the police, walked him to the police station and forced him to take a urine test because she believed that he was under the influence of steroids due to the size of his trapezius muscles. So this is an absolutely true story. And so the kid is forced to take a urine test because of his traps. And the twist is that the kid passes the urine test because he wasn't on steroids and, he just had big traps. Some people, there you go, he's just doing a lot of shrugs. So, the local newspapers then were sort of trying to hash out and think about, is this the right thing to do? And ultimately, I think most of the public was in support of it, because in certain Scandinavian countries, I think there's a very, very negative approach. And some of my friends in Sweden have told me this, that bodybuilding and particularly steroid use is looked down upon more profoundly than here in the United States. And so there was a period of time where they would actually put stickers or some sort of signs on gymnasiums in certain places, either in Denmark or Sweden, where if the gym agreed to do drug testing of the members, it would get a smiley face on the gym. No, I'm not kidding.
Oh my
and
God.
if it didn't want to do drug testing, it would get a frowny face. So, I mean, talk about, probable cause and which gyms do you think the police are going to begin, investigating?
Boy.
So I think I've heard that they ultimately stopped that, but that was a policy in some Scandinavian countries. So those were my first, the first 10 that I picked out. It was tough to pick because there were so many with catchy names and fun stuff to talk about. But probably I think most of the viewers of this podcast and many of the readers of MD probably either don't remember or never even saw those columns when they came out. So it's fun to be able to share them now with maybe a new audience.
Yeah, I mean, I remember most of these, and it was refreshing to have. It still is. You're still in the magazine, which we thank you. It's we're the last print magazine left, but it's an aspect that no one would have expected in a bodybuilding magazine to have a column dedicated to legal ramifications and the whole possibility of how it all interacts with what we do as bodybuilders. And you had over the years, so many really fascinating cases you talked about and laws, and it's I applaud you because I've never seen anything like that before or since in any other type of any exercise debate, men's fitness type of anything like that. It's very, very unique. I'm glad that you and Steve, collaborated and decided this was a good idea, because it's been a heck of over 20 years. I still can't believe it's been 20 years. But
crazy. It's
wow.
Absolutely nuts. Yeah. But yeah. And it's led to a lot of other things. And, I've gotten the chance to meet a lot of people at the various trade shows who'll come in and say, "Oh, I like your column." There are lawyers who read my column. So it's led to certainly a lot of bodybuilders knowing who I am, and I've gotten calls. I've gotten many new clients because they've been reading my column for years and they get in some sort of trouble. Or I even have people who call because obviously my law firm does things other than what I do. And I've got lawyers who do personal injury and bread and butter criminal defense and other things here in the firm. So it's nice because I think some readers of the column through the years feel like they know me because they've heard my voice speaking through the column through the years, and they'll call me with, I need a lawyer for, it may not be something that I specifically handle, and it may not even be in anywhere near where I am, but they trust me to find the right person to help them. And I've done that on countless occasions.
Yeah. And I know you're not going to blow your own horn, but when it comes to supplement industry, when it comes to steroid offenses, you are far and away, as far as I'm concerned, the best in the United States, probably the world. I don't know how the rest of the world works, but yeah, you're the man. I mean, whenever anything happens, somebody gets in trouble, your name immediately comes up. Like, I hope they get Rick Collins. I hope they're using Rick Collins, because you've established such a great reputation. And that book, Legal Muscle, was what year was that written?
2002.
Wow.
So that was, yeah. So, and that was inspired by the column. And one of the things that grew out of the column was that book. And I still, it's out of print now. And people ask, are you going to, write another one, or are you going to expand it? And, obviously the publishing industry has changed. It would probably have to be an ebook or something like that. And I put so much time and work into that book. I mean, in that book was every steroid law of the 50 states, all the federal laws. It was about not only legal issues, but medical information about steroids, practical information about it. It was really everything one needs to know about steroids. And I think that book helped lead to my being asked to be a consultant on the movie Bigger, Stronger, Faster by Chris Bell, documentary filmmaker, 2008. And Chris contacted me and wanted me to assist on the movie. And I think in many ways that movie is almost like a visual depiction of what Legal Muscle was in writing, kind of covering some of the same territory, along with, just Chris's amazing direction and the family story that was part of that movie. Yeah.
Well, I assume people can find it on eBay. You can still find a lot of out-of-print books on eBay, because I encourage everyone out there. It still holds up. I still look at it every now and then. When I first got it, I read the whole thing in 2 days. I was trying not to, because I had work to do, but I was like, that book was just fascinating, because I'd never read anything like that brought the law. Not that I have a great interest in the law, but it was because I had known people that had been in trouble, and it was just so eye-opening the way you broke it down, and the way that you've been able to help people with cases. And I'm sure lesser attorneys would have not been able to, unfortunately, and a lot of people didn't have your representation. Anyway, that is the first 10 years of Busted Legal Muscle. We're going to do a part 2 sometime soon. You let me know when you're ready, because this has been cool. We just summarized 10 years right there. 10 years of Busted Legal Muscle by Rick Collins, Esquire. Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. This has been
fun. No, thank you. Good time.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime. So
we will.
Everybody, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, give the thumbs up, all that good stuff. Share the videos, hit the bell thing so you know when we have new videos, and check out every month still in the print magazine, Muscular Development, you will find the Busted column by Rick Collins, Esquire here. So we appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.